Hello everyone, I'm Tyler Goodman. I'll be hosting our Intro to Front-End Development with React workshop today. A little bit about myself before we get started. I'm a junior computer science student. I'm the UI UX engineer on the DSC board. I work on campus on the IT/application development team, and if you want to learn any more about me, you can go to my website at manthat'sgood.dev. So what I'm talking about today is what front-end development is, what React is, and a little bit about project structure and state. I'm going to show you guys how to get started, and then we'll be building a memory matching game with React. So first off, what is front-end development? A lot of times this gets mixed up with UI UX design, and while some front-end developer roles can include design, most of the time it just involves implementing UI that the user will work with and the business logic that goes into that UI, such as pulling data to a page from an API or the logic to navigate between your components. The tools that front-end developers are using these days, if you're a web developer, you're going to be using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then whatever flavor of framework or library like React, Vue, Angular. There's also CSS frameworks, but it's not really required. And then there's some UI frameworks like Bootstrap and Material. So what is React? React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces developed by Facebook, and it requires knowledge of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. What makes React useful is its component-based development. It's incredibly fast due to the single-page application design and the virtual DOM. So you're not actually working with the browser DOM. You're working with a virtual DOM that speaks to the browser. And the reason they do this is because their virtual DOM runs a diff of your React code, and it will update only the UI that has changed based on state. And we'll get into what state is right now. State is basically it's just a variable in your code that holds data and can be changed. And when it changes, that's when your UI will update. Here's what state looks like in a functional component. There's a lot of examples of class-based components, and while you can still use those, this is kind of the more modern way to do it. It doesn't solve every problem. You might want to use classes in some cases, but functions do the job for most of your React problems. The count and set count. The count is what holds the state, and then set count is how you set it. So how I organize my React app, this might be a little opinionated, but it's a good go-to for your first React app. Is I keep 3 basic folders. One is utilities for functions that can be used anywhere, like a basic API call or something. I have a components folder for reusable stuff like cards, modals, and stuff like that. And then I have a pages folder that basically is the container for each of my stacks of components, like a home page or an About Me page. So how do you get started with all this? You're going to need Node.js, which will come with NPM, which is a package manager to install and use different packages and code. Today we'll be installing one called Styled Components, and then you'll also need an editor. I recommend Visual Studio Code. It's the easiest and most friendly editor in my opinion. So yeah, let's get building. So to get started, you're going to want to download Node.js. Go ahead and go to nodejs.org, and you're going to want to download the LTS version. This is the latest, most stable version, and it's recommended for most users. Once you have that installed, you're going to want to open a terminal, and you're going to want to make a directory that you're going to make your React app in. So I'm just going to say DSC tutorial. And then we're going to say npx create react app emoji matcher. And go ahead and let that run through. Now that this is all finished up, we can head over to Visual Studio Code and start building our app. So go ahead and start by opening a Finder window where we created our React app and drag it to Visual Studio Code. And you'll get a starter app open here that Create React App has started for us. You'll notice here that you can type npm start to start the development server, and you should see a spinning React logo. If you don't, there's probably something wrong, and you might want to go look at a couple other tutorials to get started. But let's go ahead and start by deleting everything, getting rid of unused stuff, and let's start doing a little state tutorial with a p tag here, and we're going to make a little button counter. Let's add a button, and you'll see that our page changed when you save. But we want to add some state to this like I showed in the slides, so we're going to say const count set count equals use state, or react.use state. You can also just import it, which I'll show in a second. And doing this, you don't have to say react.useState, you can just say useState since we imported it directly. So now that we have count, we can include it inside our HTML. So you want to put curly brackets and put count. When you save it, now we have 0. But you'll notice when we click it, nothing happens. So to fix that, we need to make an onClick method for our button. And we're going to go ahead and make an inline arrow function here that just sets count of the previous count plus 1. Now you'll see that the count is actually increasing. There's another way we can do this is by creating a function in the file itself and then just passing it to the onClick method. So we can delete the inline function and just give it the name of the function we just created. You'll see it works exactly the same. So now we're going to get started building our real app. So let's start off by installing that library I told you about earlier, styled components, by typing npm install styled components. And while that's going off, let's go ahead and delete everything. Oh, sorry, let's just set up our project first. So we're going to set up our component folder. We're going to set up our pages folder, and then our utils folder. Then we're going to start off by making a card component. And we're going to make a card.jsx file and a cardstyle.javascript file. And we're going to start off by using this cool little extension called React Snippets. I just showed how it worked there. If you type in React Snippets in the extensions, you'll see it. It'll be the first one that pops up, and it has a lot of cool different keywords you can type to generate functions like I just did here. I typed in RAFCE if you couldn't catch that before. So we're going to be making styles with our styled components file. Let's go ahead and import it. And I'll show you kind of how this is going to look like. So you're going to make a variable, and it's going to be a style dot something. So div button p tag. It's just style dot whatever HTML tag you want to style. And then you just put all your CSS in here, like padding, just your normal CSS. And that's going to be able to be used in your JSX files. So you're going to import your styles as, I like to do it, import everything as S, and then when I use it in my HTML, I can just say s dot whatever I had made earlier. And it looks a lot cleaner, it's a lot easier to read than just a bunch of div, class name, div all over the place. So we're going to start off by scaffolding our HTML here. We're going to have a card body, an inner, and then the back of the card, which is going to hold our emoji, and the front of the card, which is just going to be a question mark. So now we need to define these styles. So we're going to go back into our card style file, and we're going to start giving our HTML component some style. So we'll start off with the card body, which is going to be a div. We'll give it some background color. The reason I give it transparent is we're going to give the inner the color, or both sides are going to need the color. Back and the front are going to need color, and the body doesn't really care. We're going to give it some width and some height, a margin. We're going to make the cursor a pointer so that the user knows they can click on it. We're going to start with, the second thing we're going to be doing is the card inner. We're going to have a position relative, width, height, text align center, transition. This is going to be for our animation of the card flipping back and forth. We're going to have a transform animation. I'm not going to go over how that goes yet because we're going to need to pass props to this to let it know when it needs to animate. So let's go ahead and go to card front styling. Let's go ahead and give it some position, some font size, color, give it a nice grayish black color. We're going to make it a flex and center it on the horizontal and vertical axis. And fill the height and width of the container. And then this is to kind of help when it flips, so the backside is kind of hidden when it does that. Let's give it a border radius so it's not so square. And an off-whitish background color. The card back is going to have pretty similar styles. So just go ahead and copy and paste it and make sure to change the name to card back. We're going to need to add one thing here, which is going to be the animation I said earlier, which we'll add later. So let's go ahead and go to app.js and see how our card looks. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of the stuff we typed earlier. And then we'll get rid of state because we don't need that there. Let's import our card. We can go ahead and just place it there in the HTML. And make sure to run our development server again since we closed it to install the package. And now you'll see, since we have a white background, you can't really see it. So let's go ahead and change the global styles, which lives in index.css. We'll go ahead and add a background color. Let's give it like a little, kind of a blue shade here. There we go. So there's our card. But we need to make it flip when we click on it. And that's going to take a couple of things. First, we're going to need some state. So we're going to need a true or false state value in order to tell when the animation to trigger. So right there, I just used the autocomplete. One of them imports automatically. I think it's a second option, for me at least. We're going to go ahead and make a handle click to set flipped to the opposite of what it was before to toggle it on and off. We're going to go ahead and pass this function over to the onClick method to the card body. And then we're going to pass the value of flip, our state, to a prop called animate. Oops, forgot to put const here. To a prop called animate, which will be available in our styles file in card inner. So let's go ahead and go over there, and I'll show you how to access these props. So first, let's give it a transform. And to access props, we're going to put $, brackets, props, curly braces, props, arrow, props.animate. And then we're going to tell it if it's true to rotate Y -180 degrees. If not, just don't do anything. Let's also put a transform down here. Oops. 180 degrees on the Y. Okay. So now when you click it, it should rotate. Yeah. So we got that working. So now I want to make a page to hold a bunch of cards. So we're going to go over to the pages folder and make a gamepage.jsx and a gamepage.style.js and go RAFCE to get our scaffold going. Preemptively import what our styles are going to be. I'm going to start commenting kind of what the layout is going to be. So we're going to need some emojis. And then we're going to need card data to pass to the card component. And then we're going to need an initialization function. So let's go ahead and set up some emojis array here. And I'm going to use this website I found called Random Emoji Generator. It lets you select what kind of emojis you want. So I set it to generate 10, and it gives you 10 down here. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this and place it here. And the cool thing about JSX, I'm not sure if this is a property of JSX, but you can put emojis directly in your code. So let's go ahead and make our state card data and set card data. We're going to initialize it to null. And let's go ahead and make an init for our cards. If you'll notice here, we have 10 emojis, but to make a matcher game, you're going to need 2 of each. So we're going to need a way to double these. To do that, we can make a flat map function that takes each element and then just puts the element itself side by side. And then we're going to need to implement a shuffle function, which we'll do a little bit later. And we'll make an empty array and start our IDs at 0. And the IDs are going to be passed to the cards. And then we're going to say bar emoji in emoji set. And then we're going to push some card data into our deck. So we're going to give it an emoji from the emoji set. And then the cool thing about this, you don't have to put ID. You can just put ID and it will put the variable ID in there with the value of the variable. And then we're going to increment the ID. And then we're going to set the card data with the deck variable we just made. So now we can start scaffolding our game page by making a page, some header where we'll have the score that gets updated whenever we make a match, but we'll implement that a little bit later. Then we're going to need a grid for these cards. We're also going to need a way to render each of these cards based on the card data. So we're basically going to be mapping through the cards and creating a card component for each piece of data in the card data state. So let's go ahead and open curly braces and put card data, and right now it's null, so we don't want to render it if it's null. So we're going to say not equal to null, and then if that code is true, this is called a short circuiting. The following will only run when it's true. So we're going to say card data.map, and we're using data. Make an arrow function. We're going to create a card where the emoji is equal to the data.emoji. The ID is the data.id, and that's all we're going to need right now. I forgot to import it at the top so we could use it. So now let's implement our styles. Let's go ahead and import styled from styled components. And start off with our page, which is going to be a div. Make it display flex. They're going to be columns. Take 100 of the view height and 100 of the view width. We're going to center everything. Let's do our game grid, which is also going to be a div. Make a grid here. We're going to make grid template areas. Should be 5 periods with spaces in between them. And we're going to do this a couple of times here. 3, 4 times. Let's also get our header, which is going to be a div as well. Give it a font size and a color. Go ahead and save that. And now we need to make sure that init cards runs. It's not just going to run by itself because it says init. So what we're going to do is use something called the use effect. And give it an arrow function. Pass it init cards. And to get it to only run once, you pass it an empty array. Our use effect. So with an array, it'll ensure that an empty array, it'll ensure that it only runs once. If you want to put something in there, like if you put an actual array in there, that function will run every time the array changes. So let's go back to app. We're going to import game grid this time, or game page, sorry. Go ahead and save that out. And now when we check our app, oh, you got an issue here. Let's just go check our game page out. Okay, yeah, I forgot to capitalize. Now see that we'll have a bunch of cards now that flip over. But you'll notice they all say emoji. And that's because we haven't consumed the props that we sent to the card component. So let's go back over to card. We're going to give it our props. And now props is going to be an object containing the items that we passed to it. So now we can say props.emoji. And we go back. You can see now that every card, oh, I left an extra curly in there. You'll see that every card now has an emoji. That looks good, but we need to implement a shuffle so that they're not all side by side. So let's go to our utils folder and make a shuffle.js file. And let's make an arrow function that takes a variable a, which will be an array. Make a little for loop here. Random number, and then we're going to swap our elements. And then we'll return our array. Make sure to export the function by saying export default function name. Now we can import that shuffle function here. And now we can take out this comment and just call shuffle emoji set. And save that out. Now you'll see that all the cards are no longer side by side, well, except for that one for some reason. But now you notice that all the cards are able to stay flipped. And in a matcher game, you just want 2 at a time to stay flipped. So we're going to need to implement some logic for that. And we kind of want to bring that state up to game page because it's going to be easier to manage all those flipped states using game page as the brain. Because we don't want the card component to be worrying about what other cards are doing. We're just going to let game page handle that. So let's make some new state, flipped and set flipped, which is going to be an array. And let's make a function to handle when a card is clicked. It's going to be the same thing as last time. We're just going to set flipped. And we're going to spread the previous array. And we're going to make sure to pass it the ID and put in the new ID. The spread operator is pretty cool. It just gives you all the items that were in the array. It's a really shorthand way to do it instead of for looping over and inserting them in there or something. And now we need to pass it more props to the card component. We're going to pass a variable called flipped, and we're going to pass it a Boolean value based on if the array includes the ID of the card. And then we'll pass it the handle click method so it can call the parent. The reason I'm passing it like this is so that I can give it props, or arguments. There's an error here. Let's call it card clicked instead. Oh wait, I forgot to put a curly brace here. Okay, that's why. So yeah, we passed it a function that calls handle click with its own ID in the parent component. So now we can get rid of the local state. We're going to give it the props.handleClick method we just created, and then props.flipped. Oops, got an error here again. I think this is because maybe I forgot some brackets. Nope. Let's see here. Oh, that's why. Okay, so we did forget brackets when we set the state. Just giving it these values instead of giving it the this array of values, and it was expecting an array. Okay, so now this should work out. Yeah, I don't know why those two always end up next to each other, but now you'll see they're all shuffled about. And they can all flip based on the game state instead of their own local state. But we still need to implement the logic of having two at a time flipped. So let's go ahead and implement that in the clicked function. So we want to say if the flip length is less than 2, we're going to, just copy this in there instead. Going to set it flipped. And if it's equal to 1, we're going to make a timeout function so it flips after, so both cards flip back over after a certain amount of time. So we're just going to give it an empty array to reset the flips. Give it 900 milliseconds. That should be enough time to see both cards before they flip back over. There we go. So now when two cards are clicked after 900 milliseconds, the flipped array will clear. But we notice here when you click one card twice, it actually flips back over. So let's make sure it doesn't include its own ID before we do this. Put this all in this if statement here. Save that out. And now when you click one card twice, it won't run that again. And yeah, it will only happen when you click two different cards. So now we need to implement some logic for some matches here. So let's make some match state. Just start it off with an empty array because we start off with no matches at the beginning. And in here, this is when we have two cards flipped. This is when that function will run. So we're going to to say if the card data at flipped at 0, which is going to be our first card, if that emoji is equal to the other emoji, we're going to set matched, the previous matched array, and the 2 new IDs here. We already have the ID of the second card being flipped. But now we need to do something to the cards when they get matched. So let's pass another prop to the card called matched. Do the same thing before if it includes the ID. Go ahead and go over here and implement that. So now we need to make it look different if it's matched, so that the user knows that they don't need to solve that one anymore. So we're going to go ahead and give it these brackets. React will complain otherwise because it will not say that it's wrapped in a parent component when we do what we're about to do next. So we're going to make brackets again. So we're going to say if it's not matched, we're going to give it this card. And then if it is matched, we need to give it something a little bit different. Let's go ahead and format this properly so this looks a little nicer. Go ahead and copy this. Paste it in there. Format it again. And we're not going to need this click method because once the card is clicked or matched, you're not going to want to click it again. We don't really need to be worrying about animating it either. But we do want to give it a lower opacity so that it knows if it's flipped. But since it's not being animated, it's always going to show the front. So let's switch it so they can at least see the emoji that they matched. And save that out. And now if I can find a match. Okay, yeah. So now they'll stay grayed out for when there's a match. But we need to implement a way to keep track of the score so they know how many matches they've had. This should be fairly easy to do. So we'll go back over to game page. And let's go ahead and just give it match.length divided by 2, because we're passing 2 IDs to it. And if you divide it by 2, you'll just get the score for 1 match. So now once we find a match here, there we go, it updates the score accordingly. So yeah, thanks for watching our front-end dev workshop with React. If you have any questions, feel free to ask below or in the DSC CSUF Discord, and we'll see you in the next one.